Hi everyone, this is Jerry. This is a game from 1994 played between Alexei Shirov and Judit Polgar. It was one of those theme tournaments where the opening to be played by the players was the Sicilian Defense, so hopefully you take something away from this. Shirov has the white pieces, Sicilian Defense, e6, d4, the open Sicilian, takes, and now knight to c6, so just development, pressure on the central white knight, and knight to c3. So we have a Taimanov Sicilian, and black's next move is d6. A very important point in the game already is just this fifth move by black. Another move that could be played is knight to f6. So why is Judit opting to play d6 instead? Let's have a look. If knight to f6, white can go ahead and steer this game into two different aggressive lines. Well, at least two different aggressive lines. Here's one of them. Could take on c6, and after recaptures, e5. Knight d5, white does best to avoid the knight exchange and play knight to e4. A couple reasons for that. One, white has a space advantage indicated by this white pawn in black's territory, and also this knight is getting ready to hop in the weakest point in the black position, this square d6 as a whole, and there's already a white pawn supporting a piece landing on that square. Some ideas that white would have from this position are just to play c4, kick this knight away, and then at least the queen would have direct sight of this d6 point. Just playing out a couple more moves from here, we could see queen c7, pressure against this guy, f4 to defend, queen b6, pressure against b2, as well as e3. You may very well see a knight landing there since it's supported by the queen. But this variation is not possible for as long as black makes this move d6. It's not the same now if you try to go for it, because this move doesn't come with an attack on the knight. We could just play d5. Strong pawn center coupled with a half open b file. Black is doing very well. One other way that white can go ahead and steer the game is after knight f6, we could see knight d to b5, focusing on d6. d6 now played, allowing the queen to watch over that square as well as the bishop. But after bishop f4, pressure's mounting against this pawn, so how to cope with that? Knight here is not to be recommended because we could just snap the knight off, exchange queens, black is uncastled. In the meantime, we queenside castle with check, and this knight is going to be landing on d6 to give black serious problems. I mean, in fact, it's likely going to be the case that this bishop will have to give itself up for the knight, and in the resulting more simplified endgame, what it's really coming down to is a 3-on-2 pawn majority in favor of white. What we would see from here, this is still a book line, what we would see here is e5, threatening the bishop and also making a very serious weakness in the black position. The d5 square is now a hole. So pieces are now going to you're going to have to direct pieces in a way so that they're watching over this weak point. After bishop to g5, this is move 8. What we have is a Zveshnikov Sicilian. By transposition, we start out with a Taimanov, now we have a Zveshnikov. This position right here can actually be obtained one move earlier. Just quickly showing you that this can actually come about by way of these moves here: e5, knight here, d6, and bishop g5. This is move 7. The reason why that other position was, this last move of the bishop to g5 was on move 8 was because that bishop had to take 2 steps before it was on g5, and similarly, this pawn had to take 2 steps before it was on e5. So that's just a little bit of opening stuff to think about, but what it's really coming down to is that playing d6 in this position opposed to knight to f6 really means a world of difference. Because if you're not familiar with those two different sorts of pawn structures that I just showed you, then it makes sense to want to stay clear of those in your own games. In fact, when you are playing your own game, you should be trying to steer the game into a sort of pawn structure that you're comfortable with. And so if you're not comfortable with those variations, a move like d6 is one that you could maybe start to consider. One last thing to note is that if white tries to go into the Zveshnikov with knight d to b5, there is no threat now of just coming to d6, and so there's time to just play a6. That sort of move would just turn out to be a waste of time. So what we do have is just d6. And now white finally follows up with g4, expanding on the king side and looking to press forward yet again with g5, and hopefully this sort of move, white is hoping that that would come with tempo. In the event the knight comes to f6, we could see g5, gaining more space on the king side, and now this knight is going to have to react. Black does not do this, but instead a6. What's its purpose? One of its purposes, take away squares from many of the white minor pieces. It's also going to be supporting a b5 advance, and also, the black queen you can potentially see coming to c7, and from there it can't easily be harassed. What white plays next is bishop to e3, getting another minor piece out, and we have now knight on g to e7. A couple things in mind with this move. You don't want to, or black didn't want to come to f6 to have to cope with g5, again advancing with tempo. Also, this knight is protecting the c6 knight, so that a move like b5 is now possible. You try to do b5 now, this guy's going to hang, so we just develop a piece, our knights are connected, b5 is now available. Knight to b3, white is voluntarily retreating so that this exchange of knights cannot occur. If simply takes like this, black is going to be perfectly fine. You're just helping black out. This knight was obstructing this bishop's view, so this knight would like to just be placed on c6. White has a space advantage, so it makes sense to want to keep pieces on the board. So that's another reason that white would want to make a move like knight to b3 to not allow this exchange of knights followed by just knight back to c6, for example. If you just bring the queen out, we could just see just black taking, recapture, and then the knight comes here hitting the bishop. The bishop has to back up, and development is very smooth for black. Bishop comes to e7, we could see moves like b5, bishop b7, castle, etc. So, what do we have? Instead of queen d2, knight to b3. And now here comes b5. Preparing bishop b7, also getting ready to kick this knight from its cozy home on c3. And now f4. So the advancement of these three pawns here are controlling a lot of squares. What black is going to look to do is try and create some hole in all of these squares that the white pawns are currently controlling. But first things first, let's get some more pieces developed. Bishop b7. There's now already potential for tactics, since there's not only an unprotected piece on this long diagonal, but also that piece is of greater value than this bishop. Next, queen f3, already a little bit of an iffy sort of move. There already was one piece that's of greater value than the bishop on this diagonal. Now another piece of even greater value is being placed there. I'm not sure what might be a better move than that. If you make a move like g5, I'm suggesting this move because of how black goes ahead and responds after this queen to f3 move. But if a move like g5 is played, eventually we could see maybe something like this knight being kicked away, and then a move like d5, a very liberating move from the Sicilian defense. If you get this advance in, it usually acts as one of those equalizing moves, and then black could start to look towards becoming better in the position. But if you could, from this position, if after d5 you can make this pawn either capture or move forward, notice how this f5 square would then become available to this knight. So that might be one drawback, in other words, of pressing g5 in this position here. By pressing g5, they could run into some trouble with eventually a knight landing on f5 after this pawn has moved forward or captured. But we're not seeing that. Instead, queen to f3 developing, allowing the queenside castling, and now the move by black, pawn to g5. So that's why I was suggesting maybe g5 in this position here where the queen was still on its home square, because this move right here, g5, turns out to be a very strong move. What is its purpose? It's to allow this e5 square to become a nice home for the black pieces. if pawn takes like this, what we're going to have is knight to e5. In fact, this is the actual game. But it's worth considering, well, maybe, in lieu of that, knowing that this knight is going to come here, well, maybe I do best to just make a developing move, like queenside castle. And then after takes, bishop takes, we're stopping the knight from coming here right now, but after a move like knight to g6, these knights won't be denied this e5 square. In fact, there's even ideas of bishop here, although you have to watch because of the pressure being put on d6, but eventually a knight will be landing on e5. e5 is now a hole and will act as a very nice home for a black knight and maybe even the dark square bishop. So we're not seeing white castle in this position. Instead, white is kind of using the reasoning, well, this square is going to be a home for the black knights no matter what. I might as well have something tangible. Let's just grab a pawn and try and hang on to it, and have black show the compensation. So let's see how things proceed. We do see knight to e5. The white pawn has captured away from the center. As a result, e5 is now a hole. And now queen g2, pretty much the only move, because you want to be able to keep a close eye on this e4 square. You can't rely on this knight because it's going to be kicked away at some point with the b4. So b4 still comes, chasing the knight to a less than favorable square, e2. And now notice the queen is in position to watch over this pawn. And now another very strong move, pawn to h5. I'm not sure if this would be even a move that I would consider in my own games, but after seeing this game, it definitely would be. What is its purpose exactly? Let's have a look. If pawn takes pawn en passant, what we could see from here is now a move like pawn to f5, taking advantage of just this pin that we have on this e4 pawn. If after takes we could see knight coming here, and then there's some serious problems that white is having to cope with. Most directly, the bishop's hit, and notice that after this knight has moved to this square, the queen is now free to come out and give check on this square. This bishop can capture this pawn, other aggressive moves, rook here, pressure against c2. There's a lot of possibilities that black is able to implement from such a position, and a big reason for that is because we have two knights that are centrally located. If I took the time to just highlight all the squares that these knights can control, it would take some time. So they're doing a whole lot from these two squares right here. This knight right here simply can't be taken, and tactically this knight can't be taken either because, again, nasty pin going on the long light square diagonal. We aren't seeing that. That's just a what if. So that's what would occur if pawn takes pawn en passant. As was played in the game, we have g4 takes h5, and now we could simply go to f5. So these last couple pawn moves by black, what did they do exactly? Notice how, just backing up a tad, from this position, what exactly does g4 do? It makes this pawn flinch. It makes it capture away from the center, and in doing so, e5 is now available to the black knight. Knight e5, queen g2, h5, or I'm sorry, b4 first, the knight runs away. And now h4, what is it doing? It's chasing this pawn away from the center, and in doing so, f5 is now available to the black pieces. Knight f5, hitting the bishop, and now bishop to f4. What to do next? Very, very sharp move. Queen takes g5. What's its purpose? Well, you could grab the queen for one move, but we have a fork going on, king here, knight takes queen, and there's no time to grab this knight because you would just lose this rook. So again, having those two heavy pieces on this diagonal is really causing white trouble in almost all variations. So we don't see queen takes queen in this position, but instead knight to a5. This is a critical point in the game. If you were playing the black side here, what move would you make? In fact, in this game, Judit had to calculate this particular move here prior to this queen coming out and capturing the pawn on g5. So, what's the follow-up? Right now, the knight's attacking the bishop. If the bishop leaves the diagonal, well, then we could just have pawn takes knight. So that's out. So what to do in this position? If you'd like to, pause the video, see if you can figure it out. It's black to play. Okay. The move here is knight to e3. What does this do exactly? Well, most directly, it's hitting the queen. Other moves which are good are knight takes on c2. We got a fork going on here, and our queen is hanging, but we're not just going to win the queen back. We'll actually win the queen in a very picturesque mate. Two knights actually mate the white king from this position. So queen takes queen is out from this position. What more to do? Again, the knight's attacking the queen, so if you try and get rid of the knight, we recapture, and there's no time to take this bishop again because of this follow-up. Knight to f3, check. If the king goes here, it gets mated. So in other words, the white queen is just going to have to give itself up, and this is just a resignable position. So from this point here, after knight to e3, what to do? The move chosen was queen to f3, and now finally, after a series of very strong moves by black, they can now go ahead and just cash in their chips. All these knight positions, the knight positions on f4 and e5 were very strong, and as a result of their placement, coordination of the white pieces became that much more difficult, and now it's just time to grab material and show some technique in the endgame. So what we have are the exchange of queens, followed by knight takes c2, forking the king and rook, king d1, knight takes rook, and knight takes bishop. I mean, there's another way to go about this. Is just one approach to going into an endgame. After queen g3, what we could have is takes on c2 directly, king d1, and queen takes pawn, with the idea of, hey, let's keep the queens on the board since my king is going to be a bit more comfortable than your king, and if you try to grab my knight, I'm going to grab your pawn and then your rook. But it's just really a matter of taste. I think personally I would be going for a queenless endgame where I could just show some endgame technique and really give white no chance whatsoever. So this is the actual game. King d1, knight takes rook, knight takes bishop, and now pawn to b3. This pawn just comes to the rescue of this knight, which was lacking a square. After pawn takes, knight takes, and king c2 attacks the knight, knight c5. A good rule of thumb, if you have your material, it usually makes sense to just trade some pieces, so that's what we have going on here. Knight takes knight, pawn takes knight, and bishop to e2. Black is retreating the bishop so that it can relocate on this diagonal. So black is going to prepare for that sort of move. Knight f3, bishop c3, and now we see the point of this knight to f3 move to relocate on d4 with check, blocking this bishop's strength along this diagonal. And after king to d3, we just have black continuing with development. So really, this square here really doomed white in this game. First, it was the knight landing on this square, and now the bishop will be very strong from that square as well. What we could see from here is bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop, and after king takes pawn, this is still a resignable position for white. It's pretty much hopeless. We could see a move like f6 with a move like bishop to e5 to come. A black rook landing on this 7th rank here is really just going to cause white problems. This knight is a very sad piece. It seems like its only purpose right here is to just watch over this pawn. Not a good position to be in. It's really just a hopeless position for white. But as the game continued here, what we do have is bishop to g2. One other alternative is to just play pawn to b4. In the event of that move, we could just play king to e7. There's no need to castle. And if takes, we recapture. White isn't going to be winning a piece because we have this sort of pin going on. Takes. We could always press e5 and in the end win our piece back and have a 1 endgame, a more simplified endgame. But we don't see that. Instead, after bishop d6, we have bishop g2, bishop e5 similarly. If we have this sort of thing going on, well, not that variation, but from here, after bishop d6, if we see a move like this, we can actually go ahead and just take, and if takes like this, if takes like this, we could just pin it first, and only then win it, with, again, this e5 idea. You really don't ever want to capture a pin piece. You really just want to attack it first. So what we do have is after bishop g2, we have bishop e5, king c4, getting ready to grab this pawn, king to e7, and the king is ill-advised to just grab this pawn that's going to just run into trouble. Check, check. I'll just show you one variation. The king could go here, here, here. Here's one. King to a3, knight c2 check, king here, grab the bishop, grab the pawn, and then mate next. And you could have some fun if you'd like to see what would happen. King or here. It's just more bad news, and you could kind of just see why that would be the case. It's pretty much 4 pieces attacking a king, which has one very meek defender. And these guys over here really aren't contributing to the position whatsoever. So, as it happened in this game, after king to e7, we have rook to a1, and after knight to c6, we have white resigning. These bishops will be exchanged, and after something like this, if the king has enough guts to grab this pawn like this, that's just going to run into some more trouble. We could give check, have ideas of coming to the 7th rank. These pieces are vulnerable. If king here, we could have knight here. This is threatened. Actually, that would be mate. That's the only reasonable response from this position. We could just go check happy against the white king. 7th rank, also mate threats here, etc. So as it was in this game, after knight to c6 from here, white ends up resigning. So that's all for this video. Hope you got something out of it. Take care. Bye.